Welcome to Creativity Boost Podcast. Have you ever had to bounce back from a very difficult moment in your life? Have you ever found yourself on the bottomless pit of hardship and difficulty and thought that there was no way out of that bottomless pit of hardship? Today, I'm going to be having a conversation with a Vietnam prisoner of war or former prisoner of war, and he goes by the name Lee Ellis. He has turned his experiences into something phenomenal, and now he teaches people how to develop grit, develop leadership, and develop character as part of his way to contribute to the world. I'm going to bring him upstage, and we are going to begin to talk about how to bounce back from tough times. Hi, Lee. How you
Hi
doing?
there. Good to see you again.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have this opportunity to have this conversation with you. And I believe that we are going to be able to unpack something really, really interesting for our listeners today. You want to tell us a bit about yourself? I know I probably didn't do justice to the introduction. So can you help us out with that?
Yes, I grew up. I was born in '43, so I grew up in the '50s on a farm and plowing mules, and but I also drove tractors. I started driving cars when I was 11. Back then, you there wasn't a lot of traffic on the roads, so you could. But within a few years, I was flying supersonic jets. I graduated from University of
Mm,
Georgia in '65 and went immediately to flight school in the Air Force. And when I graduated from pilot training 53 weeks later, my class, it was August 1966. So the war in Vietnam, and especially the air war, was building up. And so over half of our class got an assignment that said F4 Phantom Pipeline Southeast Asia. So that meant we would get qualified and trained in the F4 for combat operations and head on over there. So I got over there in July, the summer of '67, and started flying combat missions.
wow. Now, can you tell us a bit about your experience in Vietnam and how you found yourself being a prisoner of war, and just give us a glimpse of what that experience was like?
Yes, I was. We knew that some of our friends were getting shot down, and some were rescued, but some were captured, and some we didn't know if they would ever come home because their airplane blew up and hit the ground, and we never heard from them a radio call when they were on the ground. But that was going on, but we had to do our mission. We were committed to our mission, and we couldn't complain about the politicians running the war from back home. So we just did our mission. And I was on my 53rd mission over North Vietnam. I had some more missions over South Vietnam and over Laos. South Vietnam, I was flying close air support to support the Army and the Marine Corps, and over Laos, I was flying missions to bomb out the Ho Chi Minh Trail when it diverted into Laos because it didn't come across the northern part of South Vietnam where the dividing line was. It went over into Laos and then it came in on the sides of Vietnam, South Vietnam. So I was still young. I turned 24 in October, and on my 53rd mission over North Vietnam, I got shot down. My airplane blew up, and I
Hmm.
did a parachute. I was well trained to do the parachute out, and my partner and I, we had two guys in the F4, both pilots, and we jumped out, and both of us hit the ground. Now he was captured by the militia on the ground, and I did a parachute landing fall. I hit all 5 points like I was supposed to, but within 2 minutes they surrounded me and captured me.
Wow. So how did you endure that period, and for how long were you a prisoner of war, and how did you endure that difficulty? At least I've not been a prisoner of war before, but at least I've seen some prisoners of war in movies, and it doesn't look like a fun experience. It doesn't look like a
Right,
vacation.
right.
So. Can you tell us a bit about that experience?
And initially you had to stay alive hour by hour, and then it became day by day, and
Mm,
then week by week, and then month by month, and then year by year. So I was there almost 5.5 years, uh, and I
wow.
was that was there. There was a group there that was there 5 to 8 years, and so when I
Mm,
got to Hanoi, there were a lot of guys that had been there 2 years before me. They've been prisoners.
mm,
And some of those were our senior leaders who had been tortured and put in isolation, but they kept bouncing back and they were very positive. And even though they suffered much more than the rest of us did, most of us did, uh, they were always bouncing back. And that was so important. But let me back up and say the militia found out what to do with me and how to take me north, and then they did. And fortunately, I had a good soldier in charge of taking me north, and he would protect me from the local people who were trying to beat me up and they'd probably kill me. But he and his 4 or 5 soldiers would protect me from the local people. And so we moved forward, and he turned me over to another group, and I spent 2 or 3 nights there in kind of a camp, prison camp that was for people moving north. They'd captured moving north up to Hanoi. Uh, and so there I caught up with 3 other guys, and they tied us down and tied our feet and blindfolded us, put us in the back of a truck, and we bounced along for several days. We bounced along for several nights. They didn't travel there the daytime because they were afraid they would get bombed. But so we bounced along and finally got to Hanoi, and they put us in the Hanoi Hilton. Now, the Hanoi Hilton was a name that the guys who'd been there 2 years, that's what they named it. But it was really the city jail built by the French in the 1890s. So it was it was an entire block downtown Hanoi, and the walls were 14 feet high and about 2 feet thick. And and they had electrical wires and built-in, concreted in glass fibers, glass pieces where you couldn't climb over it, and then there was electric wire all
mm,
around too. So nobody ever escaped from that prison. And
mm,
anyway, I went there, and they put the 4 of us in a cell that was 6.5 feet by 7 feet. That's like a
mm,
small bathroom in a gas station garage, about 6.5 feet by 7 feet. And so we were in there for
mm,
8 months, and then they started interrogating us, trying to get us to trying to get information. Uh, we didn't give them any information, and they tried to get us to sign statements about our treatment and to give just them some information about our lives and our where we were and all that. So we resisted that because we had 6 articles in the military code of conduct that said you wouldn't collaborate, you wouldn't give them information, and you would resist them. You would be faithful to your country, be faithful to your comrades in the POW camp, and try to follow the orders of the senior leaders in the POW camp. And so that's what we did. So we got tortured, and I was the youngest guy usually in the camp. There were 2 guys there longer than me. They're younger than me, but generally they recorded the older guys. They tortured the older guys and the more senior citizens more than the younger guys and the junior guys because they figured if they could break them, then we would give in too. But no
mhm,
matter who gave in, you didn't want to give in, and so we resisted, and they tortured us, and eventually we gave them something, but it was nothing, and it was all
mm,
lies, and we had to bounce back, and so bouncing back became a real uh, not every day, but weekly and monthly in the early days, and then every now and then. But you had to stay positive. We had to believe in our mission. We had to keep our commitment, be loyal to our commitment, and then we had to have values of uh, just keeping up with who we were and taking care of our cellmates and protecting them. But we would lie, eat, and chill from our enemy. It was
Mm.
all it was us against them. So, I would steal a pencil if I got one found somewhere, and then would steal a piece of paper and write notes on it and pass it down the hall to our buddies when we went outside. Walk down the hallway, and one guy would attract the guard's attention and the turnkey's attention, and the other guy would slide a note under the door with their names on it, and when they were captured, and their name and rank, and when they were captured, or a message about what was going on in there.
Wow. Wow, that's quite the experience. Now, can you tell us some lessons that you have picked from that experience that you feel is applicable to our day to day
Yes.
lives? That anyone who has never been a prisoner before or a prisoner of war before can take advantage of in their own present circumstances. There are people who may not be prisoners of war, but they are
Yeah.
prisoners of death, they are prisoners of pain, they are prisoners of greed, they are prisoners of, anxiety, they are prisoners of failure, they are prisoners of lack, they are prisoners of want, they are prisoners of desperation, they are prisoners of societal expectations, they are prisoners of many things around us, even in their mind. So I want to believe that your experience, even in Vietnam as a prisoner of war, can give us some clues, can give us some tips, can give us some insight into how to break out of these different prisons that people find themselves even without knowing, and can help someone out there bounce back from a very low moment in their life.
Yeah. That's so critical and important. And I just have been focusing on that in the last few years because in our culture today, there's so many people that when they take a hit, so to speak, they just kind of let it go too long and impact them too much. And so the one thing is you have to be committed. Well, first of all, you have to believe in yourself. Now, nobody's perfect, but you
Hmm.
have to believe in yourself and say, if I stay committed to my values and my commitments, then I'm going to be the person I want to be. And that is so
Hmm.
important. Stay committed to your values and your commitments, and that is huge. And that's what we did. That's why we would take torture to stay committed to our commitments and our values. And then you've got to stay positive. Now, the fact that our leaders were bouncing back after being tortured and staying positive, uh, that really helped all of us. That they've been here longer than I have, and they're bounced back and they're smiling. They're smiling again, and they're saying, we were communicating covertly, by the way. But I got contact with one
Hmm.
of those senior leaders, and he had just come out of 10 months in total darkness and isolation. And he said, he told me later, he didn't tell me with the communication we were committed to that time because we didn't have time or energy to do that. It was risky. So he told me, though, he said, uh, I just believe that someday I will bounce back, and uh, we've just got to stay positive. We got to stay committed to uh, to what we believe in and our people around us. Our people around us, our friends, our family, our bosses. That was so important. And then later, uh, they stopped the torture when the women back home really did some wonderful, no families too, but mainly the wives and women back in the late 60s. They put pressure on the communists, and Ho Chi Minh, their leader up in North Vietnam, died. and then started putting pressure on them in '68 and early '69. They put worldwide pressure, and Ross Perot was funding them to travel to Paris and meet with the Paris at the Paris peace talks with the communist people who were there, and put pressure on them. And so when Ho Chi Minh died, they stopped the torture, and so now we were living a lot better. And then there was a raid on one of the camps where I had lived, the Sante camp, and I'd moved out a few months earlier. About 50 of us had moved out. And then that raid came, and they moved us all back to Hanoi and put us in big cells for the first time. And I was in a cell with 55 guys. Now, there was no torture, and the cell was 55 guys, 24 hours a day. And uh, we started our education program. We had Monday, Wednesday, Friday classes, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday classes. You could study Russian, German, French, and anything math, calculus. You could study all of that. And so we got busy. But the main thing we did was every day we tried to get healthier and over our shame and guilt and our anger and bitterness, so that we would come home uh, healthy and not psychologically with PTSD. Now, we didn't know about PTSD, but the
Mm.
statistics, well, they have statistics on our group, and they have statistics on other veterans who fought in combat, and ours is much lower than the other veterans. We who were POWs for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, we have lower PTSD, and we're outliving our peers because we became positive, we stayed positive, and we lived in community. You got to really bounce back. We've talked about believing in yourself, being committed to your commitments and your values, and you've got to communicate with peers, people around you that have been through something similar to you. And here's a guy been there 2 years longer than I have, and he's almost dying, but he's staying positive. And I look at him and I think, I can do this. I can stay here.
Mm.
I can go home safely. And then when the torture stopped, we started thinking about we want to go home in a positive way and to be healthy. And so we would do exercising every day. I got where I could do 50, 75 push-ups a day. Uh, I
Mm.
could walk on my hands for 20 yards over and 20 yards back. And, just,
Wow.
and we stayed positive with each other. When you're locked up with 55 strong-willed personalities like air crews, like we were, you have to learn to accept them, and you have to learn to accept yourself, that you have some strengths and struggles and they have some strengths and struggles. And um,
True.
and so we learned to accept each other, and we got along. We only had an argument in there, a loud argument, where two guys were shouting at each other twice in 2 years. So, and they both
Hmm.
apologized before they went to bed that night. So we came home healthy. Our average age is 86 of the guys that were there 5 to 8 years, and we have 25% that are over 90.
Wow. Wow, that is phenomenal and fantastic. Now, this brings us to the crux of our conversation today, because this is Creativity Boost podcast, and the goal and the theme of this podcast is to help people go from idea to increased income, go from concept to cash flow, because there are many creatives who go to the grave with their ideas unbirthed. They go to the grave without fleshing out their full form, without becoming who they are meant to
Yeah.
be in its fullest form, without attaining and actualizing their potentials. And there's something really, really powerful about your experience that I want us to unlock. And that is the fact that you went through all of those difficulties. And when you came out of prison, you reinvented yourself. You basically recreated yourself. And that is the sweet spot of our conversation as far as I'm concerned today,
Hmm.
right? So, can you help us unpack how you were able to reshape, reform, and rebuild your personality despite coming from, that terrible, difficult experience? There's stories of many war veterans who come back from war and they basically are not able to find themselves anymore. They are not able to recover from the trauma. They're not able to recover from the tough times that they found themselves. But you basically bounce back and you're here today and sharing your story with the world like it's nothing, right? So how did you come about this, and what are the lessons or tips that you can give out for those who are listening to us to take advantage of people who are in a transition right now, people who are trying to reshape their journey or reinvent themselves or recreate their possibilities? What do you have to say to these people right now?
We learned one thing in there is that we all have different talents. We're similar in some ways, but we have different talents. And so you have to learn to understand that you have some strengths, and to go with some strengths, you have some struggles. So it's a great
Mm,
thing to be decisive, but when you try to make every decision, you're going to make mistakes. You know, you got to
true.
listen to people and listen to them and give them some input into your decision rather than not listening to them. So uh, we learned about our real talents. We also learned to focus. And for me, that was a
Hmm.
big thing, to learn to focus, because I'm really good at seeing the big picture and not focusing more on the details. And I've written 6 books now, but my few teachers in my teachers in school and my mother would say he would never be able to write a chapter in a book. But we learn to
Wow.
focus and think about things and then set them aside and think about something else and set it aside. And so I spent 2 months being a farmer because I grew up on a farm. I
Mm,
farmed every day for about 8 or 10 hours a day, and at the end
wow.
of 2 months, I owned almost the whole county, the property in the whole county, and I spent
Wow.
several weeks as a lawyer. And I decided I was going to be a tax lawyer, and where I was going to go to the University of Virginia. But then after that, I just put it aside, and I do like to argue sometimes, and I like to look at things, but I'm not a lawyer. I didn't, so I went back into flying. But I learned that I had strengths and I had some struggles that go with those, and I some I don't
Mm,
have very good talents. On a scale of 1 to 10, everybody has some talents that are about 6 or 7 or 8 naturally. Okay,
absolutely.
but
Yeah.
they have some other areas where they're about a 2 or 3, and you got to get somebody around you. And to be successful, you got to have somebody around you that has that other talent, those other talents, and they are naturally a 6 or 7, and work together with them and listen to them and let them hand that over to them and say, tell me what you think, and before you make that decision.
Wow. That is big one. That's a big one. So can you tell us what what helped you the most when you were making your transition, just coming from a terrible experience, being a prisoner of war, and then integrating yourself into the society and developing yourself to become a person of value in a different light or on a different level? What would you say? I know you've spoken about recognizing the strengths and struggles, but what would you say was the biggest factor that enabled you to succeed in your journey up to this point?
I think that when I looked out, I saw things where I wanted to go. Okay. And I looked at that. Is this where I really want to go? And sometimes you've got to see a short-term thing. Okay, I can go do this for 2 years, and that will set me up and prepare me to do this over here for maybe 10 years or maybe a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes you have to step into something that helps you see and open the doors for other things. Okay, you
Mm.
need to get in there and learn some more about it, and you'll see, I don't want to go that way. I was a pilot, and the airline started hiring in 1989. They started hiring retired military pilots. First time they'd done that. And so several of my friends, I was getting ready to retire, and several of my friends who were my age and rank and all were getting ready to retire, and they went right with the airlines, and they had a great career. And I thought about it. I said, I love flying, but I don't think that's for me, because I'd been in leadership in my last few years in the Air Force. I'd been in leadership. I've been a leader and leading people.
Mm.
And I said, my talents are more in leadership than flying. And I
Mm.
could do it great, but I wouldn't be satisfied. So I think I need to step out into leadership and help people uh, find out what their talents are and how to use them, and how to help other people develop and how to use their talents. So I think you got to believe in yourself. I go back into that. You got to know yourself. You got to believe in yourself, and you got to step into something that it may turn. It may not be exactly where you want to go, but it's a step. And then the next step,
Mm.
when you get in there, you'll see the next step. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's awesome. And you've brought me to my next question, which is around leadership, because you told us how that you help people, discover their leadership potential and attain their leadership, you know, capacity and fulfill their purpose using their gifts and talents. So, what would you say is the biggest problem stopping people from becoming leaders?
You mean becoming good leaders?
Yes, becoming good leaders, becoming better leaders, becoming
I
great
think you
leaders.
always have to believe in growing. You have to coach yourself to grow. And I coach myself. I've been married 50 years, and I coach myself to listen to my wife, because listening is not
Mm.
easy for me. I want to talk. I want to tell people what to do,
Mm.
And I
Yeah.
coach myself. You got to coach yourself and learn to adapt and continue growing. You can't believe because you're 30 years old and you've been very successful, then you're never going to learn anything else. You got to keep learning, because there's
Mm.
always things you don't know. And especially in today's world where things are changing faster. Now, if you were plowing a mule all day, you could learn that in about a week. So you could be expert. You wouldn't have to learn anything in that. But in today's world, you've got to continue to grow and to learn and to how to adapt. And, uh, you know, helping yourself adapt in different situations is always going to help you be more successful. Sometimes I walk in and I coach myself in a meeting. Just listen, Lee. Ask them a question and listen. And and
Mm.
then I'm going to learn something. I'm going to learn their perspective, because this is a smart person. They've been around. They're smart. Why can't I listen to them? And if they give me the
Mm.
logic, and it outweighs my logic, I'm going to get on their side and say, I think that's a good idea. That's what I'm going to do. You can't be too proud. You can't be too insecure. So you've got to recognize the most important thing of all. I have a model: insecure to secure. And we all slide back and forth on that. But the more secure you can become, believing in yourself, the more that you've been able to grow and adapt, and you're going to be a better leader.
Absolutely, and that is fantastic as far as I'm concerned. I think this is a very, very great place to call it, and I think this has been a very rich and robust conversation. So, before I call it a day for our conversation today, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share before we wind down?
I think the most important thing is to believe in yourself, continue to grow, to know more about yourself, and become a better person, and always stay firm. Take torture to live up to your values. If we had that in our
Hmm.
country today, Washington, D.C. would be very different. Every state,
Yeah.
every county, every community. I wrote my 2016 book, Engage with Honor, Building a Culture of Courageous Accountability. I wrote the first chapter, and I talked about three governors in the United States in jail. You know, uh, many mayors are in jail. And we had two people in my hometown there, two persons who managed finances in the business in the city went to jail for embezzling money. So we're all one step away from being a crook, one step away. And if you don't stay committed to your values, you'll slide away pretty quickly.
Wow, what a way to wrap it up. Thank you so much, Lee Ellis. And for you listening on the audio side, I want to believe this has been a very rewarding conversation. And I'm going to drop links to Lee's books or website in the show notes so that you can do a deeper dive and learn more about his experience in Vietnam. I believe you've written a book about that. If you haven't,
Leading,
you
Leading
should.
Talents is my first book, and it's still outselling all the others. But Engage with Honor is the second. Leading with Honor is the first one. Uh, Engage with Honor is the second one. And now, 2023, we came out with a new one because I kept hearing all these stories at our reunions. Captured by Love, inspiring true romance stories of Vietnam POWs.
Wow, awesome. That sounds really, really cool. So you heard it from the man himself. These are books that he has written, and he has written about six books, which is great, right? It just tells you that there's no limit to what you can
Right,
be, to who you can be, and to where you can go if you choose to be positive and believe in yourself. And for me, as a believer, I would also say believe in
yes,
God, right? So this is so true, and Lee's life is a testament of the fact that anything is possible if you believe, and never allow tough
right.
times to make you lose
Our, our,
your focus on where you want
our
to go. Yeah, go
our
go for
faith
it.
was so important up there. You know, guys hadn't been to church in several years. When they were coming down their parachute, one guy said, I looked up and said, Lord, I'm sorry I hadn't talked to you lately, but I need you now. And our faith was so strong, and it still is. And my faith was strong before I went there. And, I started praying and trusting the Lord that I was going to make it through. And I did.
Wow. Wow, that's
Yeah.
awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing your wonderful stories and experiences. Thank you for even having the courage to share it. And thank you for preserving your
Thank
purpose despite the difficulties you faced, and now manifesting that potential that you have in the way you're doing it. I celebrate all that you are and all that you represent. And on this note, I'm going to call it for today. Thank you to you, my listeners. If you found it valuable, do well to listen again, share it with someone, drop a comment, drop a like, so that more people can hear the word and learn how to bounce back from tough times, because the world is riddled with different challenges and people need help. People are in prisons of many kinds, and you just never know who would receive a word of encouragement from listening to this. So, spread the word, and I'll see you on our next episode. Till then, have a good one, and bye bye.